I'm here with Teresa Nicholas, the author of Buryin Daddy, Putting My Lebanese Catholic Southern Baptist Childhood to Rest. Welcome to Jackson, Teresa.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Putting My Lebanese Catholic Southern Baptist Childhood to Rest, that's a lot to put to rest in a subtitle. How does writing a book like this, a memoir, allow you to do something so big?
Well, it's somewhat of a cathartic experience, especially since it took me 8 years to write the book and get it published. I had a lot of time for the catharsis to happen.
Okay.
And I went through countless drafts. That's also very cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
And it really causes you to have to clarify your thinking about a subject when you're writing it. And no matter how much time you have to write it in, but in 8 years you have a lot of time to do some thinking.
Did you have your mind around it taking quite that long? Many authors are astonished by how much time they spent, but of course you were in publishing at Crown for 25 years.
Right.
You've seen things take a long gestation to arrive.
Right, but I mean, to be honest, I thought when I started writing the book I would finish it in a year and get it published the following year.
Okay.
But things rarely work the way you plan.
Okay.
So it took me longer to get a first draft. I didn't have a first draft until something like 2005.
Oh my goodness.
And then I probably took another year to finish the book and then began the revisions, lots of revisions.
And at first, when you approached the subject matter, did you know it was a memoir? How did you start writing it?
Well, when I first started, I thought it might be a novel. I have to admit, I thought this could be a novel. But I had a friend who worked with me at Random House, and she read 50 pages, and she said, I think that the story is strong enough so that you could write it as memoir. And she said, I've learned a lot from reading the first 50 pages. She said, I learned a lot about Mississippi, especially Mississippi during the Civil Rights era. And I think people, she said, I think people would like to know the true story. So that was when I changed my thinking and started it as a memoir. And it was before memoir was even as popular. You know, and since I've started writing the book, memoir has become more popular and has fallen out of popularity.
Yeah.
But it was so long ago. This was probably around 2000 that it was certainly before memoir started to blossom as a genre.
Right, okay. Tell us a little bit about that Mississippi that your friend was learning about. How rare is it in Mississippi for someone to be of Lebanese descent? Someone from a multicultural city like New York or heck, even Baltimore wouldn't even imagine that that was a big deal, but in Mississippi? Rare?
Pretty rare. I mean, you know, William Morris used to say that Yazoo City was half hills and half flatland, and but the people there were really flatland people. This is a quote from him. He said, but we had a leavening of Jewish, Chinese, Italian, and Lebanese. And that's absolutely true, and it was true throughout the Delta, throughout the cities of, you know, Vicksburg and Greenville, I think of in particular, but also Cleveland. If I had to guess at the percentages of the population for the Lebanese, I would say, you know, very small. I mean, 3% of the population of Yazoo City, or even smaller perhaps. We were just maybe half a dozen families.
Okay. Very close-knit, all Catholic?
Very close-knit, and in places like Yazoo City, yes, we were Catholics because we had been Catholics in Lebanon. You know, Lebanon has a mixture of Arab and Christian. But in some places like Vicksburg, that the religious was expressed as Greek Orthodox.
Oh, I see.
Vicksburg is a very big Greek Orthodox community that was founded about the time that the Lebanese started coming to Yazoo City as well.
Okay, and let's talk about those early years. Was it? It's interesting in the book that your father holds what were very traditional status quo ideas about what ought to happen in Mississippi. When you were in high school, a tremendous conflict was only just beginning.
Yes.
That you were in high school by 57 or so, is that right?
I was in high school from 68 to 72.
68 to 72, okay, I'm sorry. And Mississippi schools still had not entirely followed the order of the law to integrate with all speed by that time. Is that right?
Right. Well, the high school most high schools were desegregated in January 1970.
In 70,
yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And your father held what were really sort of status quo ideas about what ought to happen. In other words, no, this turmoil doesn't need to come here,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want my daughter going to an integrated school.
Yeah.
And yet he was of a very slim minority in town. Did he ever clash in his own mind with that kind of irony of here's someone from a 3% taking the view of the majority and the empowered majority?
Well, I think that the Lebanese tried very hard to assimilate,
Okay.
as did the Italians and the Jewish population too. Yazoo City had a Jewish mayor for many years, and they were fairly well assimilated groups, even though they were in the minority, not only because they were Lebanese but because they were Roman Catholic. But most of the people in the Lebanese community upheld the general sentiment, political sentiment in the community.
Okay. Now, your father was a fascinating man, and of course, Buryin Daddy, he is, even after dying, he is a huge character in the book. Tell us a little bit about who your father was and what his bright side was first, his lovable and light side.
Well, he was a very childlike person. He loved playing with us when we were children. He loved taking us to see the little red tractor out on Highway 49 at the farm implement store.
Okay.
He was very much in touch with his own childhood, and he was a very fun father in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed even in the ways that he especially loved and tried to protect you, there were kind of sweet oddities in that. You said in the duplex when you first got into it, even though it was freezing cold and super drafty, he didn't want you to run the heaters at night because he was worried you'd asphyxiate, even though he knew it was terribly uncomfortable. Tell us about that duplex and about how that came about. It becomes a character in the book too.
Yeah. Well, we lived with my grandparents until I was 5, and then in 1959, when the family got too big, he sought out a house and he bought this duplex, which he spent about $2,000 for.
Okay.
He moved us into it without doing any renovations except for taking out the center dividing wall, and it was almost uninhabitable. And like many people in Mississippi, at the time, we didn't have air conditioning, but we also didn't have heat. And especially, we had heat during the day, but as you say, he wouldn't let us keep the heat on at night because he was afraid we would asphyxiate. And he was right about that, the heat was such that we could have asphyxiated, but it made for a pretty uncomfortable existence.
Okay. Now, you clashed with your father as you grew up and went to high school, and someone here who had read the book wanted me to ask this question of you, that in many of the things that you described, no one saw the kind of blazing heroic example that would lead you to the many, not necessarily heroic, but really brave stands for a young girl to make in here when you say, no, I want this to be this way. I want to go to a school that's integrated, and you're wrong. Who were your examples? Who were the things that led you to be so brave about that stuff?
Well, I'm not sure if it was bravery, but I will say that there were many fine people in Yazoo City, in the various churches, in the Baptist church and also in the Catholic church where we were members. And the nuns at the Catholic school that I attended gave me books to read. And one of the books they gave me was To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh.
And I was very influenced by the material they gave me to read, and in particular that book. I read it when I was quite young, and I really believed, I was really taught to believe, and I did believe that integration was the way, the way that we should go in Mississippi. So I had a lot of influence from from the clergy, and also from adults in the community, from other adults in the community.
Did you remain Catholic? I know Catholics that I ask, they say once Catholic, always Catholic. What do you mean?
Yeah. I believe that. I believe once Catholic, always Catholic. I mean, that's like Lord Marchmain and Brideshead Revisited. You know, you eventually, on your deathbed, you wind up being a Catholic again. But I did fall away from the church, and I have not returned. I don't agree with the church politically.
Okay.
But I think that being Catholic is a tremendous formative experience. And regardless of whether you're a member of the church or not, you're always a Catholic.
Yeah. Let's fast forward in the book. In near the end of the first part of the book, you receive the wonderful opportunity of a scholarship to Swarthmore, and you leave and later discover publishing. And then the second part of the book is really the call back to home. And someone who was reading the book here pointed out, my goodness, in some ways the mother made a favorite out of one of your other sisters, Lisa, and yet you're called upon to do so very much. What helped you answer that call? I mean, one could envision someone doing what you were doing in New York saying, no, you have other sources to help you do this. Number one, what did your mother have to do? Your father had died. What was she facing?
Well, my mother was, to some degrees, a person who couldn't cope with the world. She was a banking non-entity. She didn't receive any mail of her own, and she seemed like someone who needed a lot of help. And I needed her, even though I may not have realized it at the time. I think I needed her to try to get over, my relationship with my father. And to me, she is the most important and sympathetic character in the book, and the wisest character in the book.
Okay. And so that love brought you home, but you're saying that initially you didn't even realize how much you needed it?
I think that's true. I hadn't been close to my mother ever. As you pointed out, my other sisters were better candidates for this role, but after my father died, there was just something about the way we started to interact that was very necessary for me.
Now I have a question about hoarding. There's of course a program on television now about hoarding, in which just colossal. Have you seen it?
No,
well, it's a reality TV program called Hoarders.
Oh.
And they go into these colossal situations in which people have stacked their homes to the rafters with things. But what you've read to us and what's in the book does not quite seem that extreme. Though, what would he hoard? What were the things that he would collect, keep, and stow away?
Well, he hoarded a lot of things. I mean, he hoarded just about anything having to do with automobiles or automotive parts.
Okay.
And he hoarded these things primarily in his bedroom, but also in a room in the house that he called the junk room, and in an outhouse that he built for himself called the Little House.
Okay.
So he put all these things relating to automotive parts. He loved anything having to do with a monkey. He loved monkey calendars. He collected mops. Like full-size mops. He hung mops in bushes outside in the yard. He put them under his bed. He kept a lot of plastic things. He usually washed the plastic containers, but he kept a lot of plastic things. Just myriads of things. It's almost too detailed. He also had a coin collection, which was actually a positive thing.
Yes.
He loved collecting coins, and I don't know, just so many things.
I wonder if you'd talk with us about metaphor then. Here's someone who you've come home to help your mother. You've got the challenges that she's facing, but she's also challenging this packed house of all this stuff.
Yeah.
And you are through that packed stuff. How does that help you with your interaction with your father as you have to work with it, dispose of it or not?
Well, I've always been a meddler, even when I was a little kid. I loved to just meddle through people's, chest of drawers. And I started to, with my mom, clean out his room, and I learned a lot about him through looking at his stuff, and I became fascinated by it. I mean, I think I may have mentioned I found booklets that he had written when he was 8 years old, essays, and it just provided a clue to him into who he was, and I found it all sort of mesmerizing and fascinating. Mm-hmm. And then it provided a clue as to who we were as a family.
Okay, sort of a tracking of
our experiences. And I found a set of blueprints, for example, that he had ordered in the 1950s, or of a house that he had wanted to build for us, and he had written on the back of the envelope how much he thought it would cost us to build a house. And I could only imagine him ordering the blueprints and how hopeful he might have felt, but then realizing he couldn't afford it. It was going to cost something like $11,000. And then realizing he couldn't afford that, and he just put them away in a drawer. And I found them after his death, and I just thought that was very poignant.
It's like finding a little dream, isn't it? Oh
yeah.
My goodness. Well, tell us, don't reveal the ending for us, but tell us some of the things that you hope to bring a reader to as they came to this very, very personal story about you returning to Yazoo City, helping your mother, and is in essence burying Daddy. What were you working toward? What would you most like a reader to grab from this book?
Well, that reconciliation and forgiveness are possible, regardless of whether the person is physically in your life or not. I think that, it's a story that many people might relate to because of that. The story of a family and family difficulties, the story of underlying shame that someone might feel about a family, and then being able to put that behind you.
Great. Well, we've been talking with Teresa Nicholas. She's the author of Buryin Daddy, Putting My Lebanese, Catholic, Southern Baptist Childhood to Rest. Thanks so much for spending time with us, Teresa.
Thank you.